So 2 of the recipes that are included in this local foods training come directly from our Harvest of the Month fact sheet. So all Harvest of the Month pledge sites receive monthly material, including posters and fun stickers and these fact sheets that have fun facts, nutrition information, and 2 really great school-approved recipes. So there's a fresh salsa, which I'm going to be demonstrating, and then right now I'm going to demonstrate our cherry tomato and corn salad. So the first step is I have some local corn here. Corn grown in Maine in the summertime. We all want it. We're all excited to see it in the grocery stores. It's a hit or miss. Sometimes you get really delicious ones with full kernels, and sometimes you get ones that look a little bit more like this and kind of sad at one end. So certainly if you don't want to get local corn, you can also just get a bag of frozen corn kernels, and that is a perfectly fine substitution. But I am going to demonstrate quickly how to get the kernels off your corn if you're not using the bagged frozen variety. So I'm just going to shuck it, take this home, compost it. Maybe your school has a school compost pile, that would be great. And then what we're going to do is you're just going to stand the corn cob upright, and then you're going to take either a chef knife, if it's sharp enough, or a serrated knife, and just cut down right along the core of the cob and get all of the corn kernels off. And you don't want to go too deep or too shallow. It's kind of one of those things you just have to get the hang of it. After a while, obviously too shallow and you don't get all the corn, too deep and you get some of that fibrous part. But it's really that simple. Compost that cob. And for this recipe, I'm looking to get, it calls for 20 medium ears of corn, or about 15 cups. I'm certainly not going to make that quantity right now for this demo, but I'm going to see what I can get from this local corn that I have. Just a little cool fact about corn is when you're husking it, it has all these little threads, these little hairs. Every single one of those little threads attaches to a kernel. Every single one of those little threads has to be pollinated. And if it's not, that kernel won't really develop, like you can see the top here. So there are plenty of busy bees and insects behind our food. You definitely want to try and get off as much of those little threads as you can. It's not that they're not edible or digestible, but sometimes they can kind of feel like you have a hair stuck in your food if you don't get all of them out. So there's the corn that we have. Kind of pick through any little hairs that might be in there, but not worry too much about it. And then the tomatoes that we're using for this are, of course, our cherry tomatoes. A lot of these, there's a big variety here in variety and size and color. We've got some green ones, some yellow ones, orange. These little orange ones are my favorite. They're called sun golds. They're becoming more common. You can even buy them at the grocery store. They're so sweet and delicious. And then our classic little red ones. So I am just going to, I've got about 3 pints here. And some of the bigger ones I'm going to have and then have again, because I kind of want them to be like easy bitefuls. So I'm just going to have or quarter all of these cherry tomatoes. Once again, using that serrated knife is really going to be your best tool for tomatoes so they don't crush and just go splashing seeds and juice all over the place. Great, so now we have our quarter half cherry tomatoes and we have our corn, and don't forget that the corn is raw. So the recipe on our Harvest of the Month fact sheet instructs you to cook the corn, or of course if you're getting a bag of frozen corn, it's already hard cooked. But what I like to do is, I think it's a lot easier to take the kernels off the cob of raw corn when it's not cooked yet, when it's still raw. Because I find that sometimes if I do that technique where I'm shaving down the sides for the cooked ear of corn, you're losing a lot of juice, it just gets kind of messy, and so I'm a fan of doing it this way, taking that raw ear of corn, taking out the kernels, and then now I'm going to just boil it in water really fast just to cook it, and then I'm going to cool it down and assemble our salad.
Salt the water when it's just about at a boil, and add the corn kernels. These are raw, so they'll need to cook for about 3 to 4 minutes or until bright yellow. Once the corn is done cooking, strain into a colander and pour cold water on top to stop the cooking process.
So we have our corn that's been cooked and cooled. We have our cherry tomatoes halved and quartered. And then next up is we have some fresh local basil. So basil, like tomatoes, is another ingredient that you want to keep out at room temperature. Ideally out of sun, maybe in a glass of water, the stems in a glass of water, and you want to use it in a few days. If you put it in your refrigerator to store it, you might think it's going to last longer, but it's going to turn brown or black and will basically be ruined. So for this recipe that we're doing, it calls for 8 ounces of fresh basil minced, and I'm going to do about half of that. And so for basil, oftentimes in recipes you'll see it called for a chiffonade of basil, and you don't really ever see it like chopped basil. So a chiffonade basically is when you take the leaves and you roll it up in a little bundle, and then you take your knife and you slice, chop, 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 chop down that bundle. So when then you kind of like go to mix up the bundle, you have long strands. Basil does well if you either tear it or rip it, or if you chiffonade it into those long strands. So I'm going to use about a quarter of this bunch. I think that'll give me about the 4 ounces that I'm looking for. And I'm going to try and take most of the leaves and roll them up into a bundle, a loose bundle. That's just the way that you get those long strands that you often see maybe like garnished on a pizza or something like that. Chef knife for this one. So I'm just gonna roll it. This is a little bit tricky to do in these gloves, but hopefully you have nicer plastic gloves in your kitchens. Make sure there's no stems. And then I'm just gonna go back and forth and get like 1/8 of an inch thick. They're just going right down that rolled up bunch of basil. Just like that. So now you have the nice chiffonade of basil. And in this larger bowl, I'm gonna end up combining everything. So to make the light dressing for the salad, we're going to use some olive oil, some lemon juice, fresh or bottled is fine, and some salt. And then I'm also going to mix in some of our part skim mozzarella cheese. So for the olive oil, because I'm doing half of the recipe calls for 1/4 of a cup, so I'm going to do 1/8 of a cup olive oil. juice of what would be half a lemon, so I'm going to call that 1 tablespoon. Typically you're going to get about 2 tablespoons of juice from 1 lemon or 1 lime. So about 1 tablespoon, do good for that. And then our salt. Half a teaspoon kosher salt. And I'm going to put the basil right into the bowl here. Before I go in there with my hands and get them all dirty, I'm going to add the cheese. So we're looking at 1.5 cups of our part skim mozzarella. You'll often see mozzarella paired with tomatoes. It's a really good kind of light flavored cheese, so it doesn't overpower the really good sweetness of the tomatoes. So I have all of our ingredients ready to go, so I'm going to start mixing with my hand. I'm going to take that corn, those corn kernels, and all of our beautiful cherry tomatoes. And hand, spoon. I got my gloves on, so I'm okay with using my hands, but just to kind of show you how that mixes. This is a really beautiful, colorful summer salad. Really light. You could basically source almost all these ingredients locally, which is pretty cool. And that's good. And this is one of those dishes that does really well after it's been sitting in the refrigerator for maybe a day. So I would make this a day ahead of time, pop it in the fridge with some plastic wrap on top of it. And because there's that acid from the lemon juice, it's really gonna kind of meld all the flavors together. And this will be, it's fine to have right now, but it's gonna be really good tomorrow. So that's the cherry tomato and corn salad.